Hello and welcome to Friday Cafe. I'm Judy Carson with the State Department of Education. I'm joined by my colleague Betsy Laborious from CREC and the director of the Statewide Family Engagement Center, and her colleagues at CREC, Francisco Bades and Gloria Marclario, are hosting our session today. Today we're talking about high school. And we realized in the 6 years we've done Friday Cafe, this is our first session on high school, and it truly is the final frontier for family engagement work. It's our growth area, but we have great presenters with us today. Ann Henderson, who is a national expert to guide us in this work. And we've built this community with you. We have advisors, and Betsy and I are the facilitators here, but it's really built around your interests and preferences. We're trying to model some of the best practices in family engagement, such as being welcoming, strengths-based, and creating a safe environment to try out new things. And boy, in this environment, we're definitely experimenting, and we are finding some wonderful innovations with engaging families during this pandemic. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Betsy, who's going to say a little bit more about our topic today and then introduce our conversation catalysts.
Thanks, Judy. As Judy already introduced me, my name is Betsy Laborious, and I work here at CREC, and I am the project director for the Statewide Family Engagement Center here in Connecticut. And so I welcome new and former and ongoing colleagues and people to our Friday Cafe this morning. My understanding is we have a lot of new people from other states as well. So welcome to our colleagues from other states, to our network and our ideas as we move forward. I'm just going to say personally what Friday Cafe means to me just for a second. And that is, I think we're in our 7th year, Judy, as we started pretty small, and we continue to grow. And this is a good time. It has always been for me personally. So for me personally, it's brain food. So ideas, people, perspectives just give me so many new ideas and food for thought. But the other piece that's incredibly important, and I think incredibly important right now, is support. So support among us as like-minded people in terms of family engagement, to hear each other. We talked about this a little bit before. There's a lot going on right now, and sometimes we feel like we're moving forward. Sometimes it feels like sometimes it feels like a tornado. To have support and to feel that support really happens in our network. So we're again welcoming everyone here today. Thank you. Judy talked a little bit about our topic, and that is high schools. So this is an interesting topic, of course. And I know in Connecticut, the research is telling us, and some of the data is telling us, that is a real issue right now for what's happening in our high schools. And as a former high school teacher and a director of intervention for high school students, this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So if you're here and you know I'm speaking to the choir talking about family engagement, but one of the things, of course, that we know is that family engagement is a critical component of student success. And we know that from research, and that is pre-K to grade 12. No matter what the economic kind of status is of families engaged with their children produce better results for young people. And so that's what we're really here talking about today. We're dealing with issues here in Connecticut of chronic absenteeism. For some kids, online may be okay, but it is not for the majority of students here in Connecticut right now. And so we're here today really to discuss, to learn look at a study that Ann Henderson will be sharing with us, but also to share ideas and to give perspective and to think about what are the critical components for us to reaching out, finding, engaging young people so that they're in school, they're engaged, and they're getting their needs met in terms of being able to graduate on time with the kinds of skills that they need for the 21st century. So I have a question for you. And I'm going to ask you to kind of set the stage in terms of our conversation today. And I'm going to ask you to think about it. And it looks like everyone knows the drill here. Everyone's introducing themselves, so that's great. My question for you is, right now, from your perspective, whether you're here as from a parent perspective, or if you're a high school principal, or if you're a social worker, or if you're a librarian that's doing work in schools, from your perspective, what keeps you up at night when we think about high school students entering now or entering in September? What are those things that really concern you? And I'm going to give you a minute, if you wouldn't mind putting them in the chat, and Judy's going to read them out. It will help us to kind of set the stage.
Betsy, we're seeing some answers come in. Quite a few folks are talking about mental health, some anxiety about the unknown, quality of student-teacher relationships, and a lot of uncertainty and mental health concerns.
I see this one, students being disengaged too, right? A lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's my pleasure, and we're going to continue to get high suspension rates, right? Purpose in life and options and career and life paths. It sounds like a lot of people here in Connecticut also are talking about the social, emotional kinds of issues that our high school students are needing and feeling connected to school and connected to their teachers and their peers. Well, I have good news. So our conversation catalyst this morning is Ann Henderson. And I think that most people know Ann Henderson because of her work nationally on behalf of family engagement. But I'm going to just give you a little teeny bit of background. Ann is a senior consultant for the National Association for Family School Engagement, which is NAFSCE, which is our kind of mothership of networking and helping us think about new ideas. But you may know her because you may have read Beyond the Bake Sale. One of the things I read 10 years ago, and it's kind of tattered and torn with all the notes that I have on the side. And wasn't it my thrill to meet Ann Henderson some 10 years ago in the book that she signed for me? She was also the co-author of A New Wave of Evidence, which really looked at research in terms of family engagement and bringing forth that idea of the research and making it prominent, not only in our states in Washington, D.C. Ann is also, to our benefit, a consultant to Connecticut for our statewide Family Engagement Center grant and my mentoring coach in many, many ways. So without further ado, Ann, thank you so much for being here this morning, and thank you so much for talking about beating the odds in the conditions for high schools.
Thank you. Thank you, Betsy, for that lovely introduction, and welcome everybody. I'm just delighted to be here. I really treasure my work with Connecticut. I've learned so much and met so many wonderful people, many of whom are right in the audience today. So yes, the final frontier, the high school. And I think we've all been worried about high schools and what's happening for high school children. They've pretty much been on their own with some kind of computer or device, Zooming all day long, or just fading away because they can't deal. So it's time to focus our attention on them. Let's go to the next slide. What's on tap besides coffee this morning? Well, first we're going to deepen our understanding of strategies that work to engage families in the very complex world of high school. and zoom in on what effective practice looks like in schools that have beaten the odds, that have higher graduation rates and kids going on to college than district averages, despite their serving large numbers of low-income students. And then we're going to spend a little time thinking about what it would take to implement these strategies in practice in your high schools. One thing that we want to emphasize is that the strongest predictor of how engaged families are is what schools do to encourage and guide parents and invite them to become involved. So if we're in a school or a setting where parents don't seem to be involved, we shouldn't be looking out the window and saying, what's the matter with those people? We should be looking in the mirror to see what are we not doing, and to think about how we're inviting parents to join us in the school family. Next. I've been tracking the research since 1982. And if I were to boil it all down into three things, these would be the three things. The most important thing, the foundation for everything else, is building relationships, because that creates trust. And without trust, nothing else works. And then next, it's linking to learning, in the sense that we have to connect parents to what their kids are learning and doing in class, and how they're progressing, what skills they need to be honing, and where they might be struggling or falling short. And this has to be two-way, because parents are experts on their kids, and they know if their kids are struggling with something. They know their children's strengths, their desires, their passions, their goals. And so this is the critical here, beating heart. And especially in high school, parents need to know how to guide their kids through this complicated system and troubleshoot and problem solve and make sure their kids are getting the attention that they need, the extra support they may need, and they're landing in the right program for what they want to do with their life. And another thing to keep in mind, going back, is family engagement is protective. The research is so clear on this. The more that families can be advocates for their kids, support their progress, the better their kids do and the longer they stay in school, and the more likely they are to launch into a successful post-secondary experience and a career. So here's a big question for us. We've talked about this complex world of high school and all the roles that parents need to play. What do parents need to know and be able to do to ensure that their kids are successful in school, graduate on time, and are ready to succeed in a post-secondary education program when they graduate? That's food for thought, right? Let's take a look at what the research is telling us. Probably these were things that popped into your head when I posed that question a minute ago. They have to set those expectations and monitor progress and help their student think about what they want for the future and set goals that they can reach, and then guiding them through the system and making sure they're taking the classes that they need, and then being able to intervene if there's a problem of any kind, whether the kids are being bullied at school or they're having a difficulty with a certain subject or a certain teacher or whatever it might be. And also, very important, monitor their out of school time, which is 70% of their waking hours. And what are they doing with that time, and how constructive is it? And also be able to speak out for other students and parents if you've noticed that your kid isn't the only one that's struggling in a certain grade or class or with a safety issue or whatever it is. So that's a pretty complicated skill set, isn't it? And think how much better kids will do if parents are equipped to do that. So here's the question for you. Where do families learn how to do this? Where do they know that they're supposed to do these things and how to do them? before they even get to school to try to deal with the situation. I see somebody has put in the chat box, they learn this from other parents. So they have to know people who know how to do this stuff, right?
We have quite a few people talking about parent leadership training.
Yes, parent leadership training is a critical place. And who offers that? And what might be the role of a school in helping equip parents with this knowledge and skills? Isn't there a responsibility there? I know I taught, when my daughter was in elementary school, I talked a lot to parents I knew whose kids were in high school, and they filled me in. But I had a good network of people who were able to do that. And when we think about our system that's very loaded toward favoring kids from better educated, higher income families, we really have to zoom in and think, how are our lower income families who may not have the social networks that we do going to learn this? And whose responsibility is it that they should know this? And I think it's a community responsibility, and the school definitely has a role to play in that. Connecticut has the wonderful parent leadership programs, Parent C, Parent Leadership Training Institute, and so on, where parents learn a lot of this and then they share with others. But how do we make sure that every parent that needs this knows it? Next. Thank you so much for your ideas and your participation. So let's talk about this Beating the Odds study, which my colleagues at NYU did this a few years ago, and then I came in toward the end of their work and helped develop tools and other features of the study, and using the data to zero in on what the family engagement practices were at these schools. So these are schools that serve 100% low-income kids of color. And they are performing above the district average in terms of graduation rate and other things. So let's, wait a minute, back, next slide.
Okay.
It's jumping. Here we go. So it's 13 schools.
Okay.
There are 1,200 schools in New York City. So this is a small sample, and they're not the only high schools that have succeeded to this extent. But my colleagues picked these 13. They tended to be a little smaller than the average school. I think the largest one had 800 students, and that may have been also a key to their success. And they found that there were 4 areas of practice that were highly related to success, which we'll talk about in a minute. They're just listed here. But weaving in and out of these 4 key areas were powerful strategies for engaging families in promoting college and post-secondary attendance for their kids. So let's take a look at the next slide. You can see that at the Beating the Odds schools, if you look at the top numbers, that their graduation rate was 10 points higher than the district average, even though, and you see where the 9th graders coming in were, that they were lower income, lower performing in their key reading skills. About a third of them were overage, and almost 7% needed special education, all of which were higher risk factors than the district average. And yet they had a 10-point higher graduation rate. It's not 100%. It's a very at-risk population, but that is definitely something to look at and see what were they doing. Next. So academic rigor meant that there were no low-level classes. There was not tracking. All students took college prep classes, even if they were in a tech career program. And some of these schools were tech career schools. There was East New York Automotive Tech. There was Banana Kelly High School, which was, sort of focused on tech careers. But the goal was to have every student graduate with an acceptance letter to a post-secondary education program they could succeed in hand. And so even if they decided maybe not to go to college or into a post-sec program right away, they'd have all the qualifications they needed to get into one later. And to do that, their progress was closely monitored. And then you see the next thing, that there were timely supports that were short-term. Kids weren't taken out and put in a low-level program, taken out of, more challenging science and just put in, earth science. They were taken out and really given catch-up that let them go back in and stay on track. And a key feature of the timely supports was having an adult advisor, somebody they could turn to at the school, somebody who knew them and who was the parent's main contact at the school. So think of a typical large urban high school and a parent who's worried about their kid, seems disengaged, says he never has homework, whatever. And so this parent wants to go up to the school and find out how he's doing, doesn't want to wait for the report card. Who knows the kid at the high school? Who would they even go to? Would they try to find one of the teachers who have the kid? Well, maybe, oh yeah, your kid, he's the one with the glasses. Yeah, I think he's in my third period class. So what's the problem? So we have to have people in the school who know the children well and who the parents know. And then they have a college access culture. So there's a summer bridge program for incoming ninth graders where the message is loud and clear. This is a college prep school. And we're going to work with you to make this happen for your kid. And the planning for the future starts then, not in 11th grade or 12th grade. Gee, where do you think your kid'd like to go to school? No, it's all the way back. And then there's a college office that may be separate from the guidance office that has all the information that families and students need about financial aid and options. And then finally, they're really on their data. And one of the things they do is they track their graduate and they find out what programs and schools kids from their school excel in. And that tends to be where they steer their graduates. And in fact, many of the graduates have come back and are now teaching in these schools. So there's kind of a pledge that these schools make to families. It's a post-secondary prep school. We're going to do whatever it takes to make sure your kid gets there. You have somebody you can count on who knows your kid. Nobody's going to fall through the cracks. And we're going to help work with you to apply to whatever kind of post-secondary program you want and to get that financial aid you may need. And we can't do it without you, without the parents. Now think about this for a minute. Wouldn't you want any high school your kid went to be doing this? Is there anything you would, take off this list? Probably not. So we need to think about what are our high schools doing? Is this the kind of pledge that they can make without crossing their fingers behind their back? So just zoom in a little bit on examples of good practice. For college access, they need to build trust with many families to overcome their reluctance to fill out financial aid forms with confidential information, or to say, actually, we're not documented. And they're very careful about giving workshops and support to families whose kids are undocumented, to steer them to colleges and to financial aid sources that they can get without, alerting ICE. And they often do evening programs. Of course, they have college fairs. They take kids and families on trips to colleges and programs. Some of them enroll in middle college, high school programs where some of the courses they take are at LaGuardia Community College or something right there locally. So when they graduate, they actually have some college credit already earned. and some experience on a college campus. And they bring their alumni back to talk to kids about their experience with college. And that has been really popular for kids to be able to just ask questions. Well, what's it like? Do you live in a dorm? What's that like? Can you find your classes? Can you afford the books? All those questions that kids have that keep them up at night. And I want to say something important here, which is that these 13 schools were not the result of a district program that said, let's work with a few high schools and really help them offer whatever it is that kids need to make it. These were schools that did this on their own and figured out what they had to do and made it happen. And they often had to go up against the bureaucracy of the district to use, to have restructure how they're organized so that they can do this, to have an extra counselor, to offer training to staff on how to do an advisory. I've talked to a number of high schools along the way that have said, oh yeah, we tried an advisory program, but you know what, it didn't work. And I'll say, it didn't work? What happened? And they'll be like, well, our high school teachers just didn't know how to connect to kids in that way. They're subject matter experts. They don't know what to do when they sit in a room with, 10 kids and try to get close to them. And I say, well, what kind of training did you offer? And they just looked at me and said, training? So there were, to do what we're talking about here, the schools had to substantially restructure themselves. Many of them had interdisciplinary teams and other ways that, and the school day to allow for an advisory system to take place so that kids were meeting with their advisor at least once a week and was sure to see their advisor every day. That advisor might be a classroom teacher or a counselor or a resource teacher or the school social worker or even a coach, a gym coach. But they had to really think about how to do this. So you're probably thinking, didn't this cost more money? And the answer is yes, it did cost a bit more per student to operate this way. They had to raise extra money. But you know what? It cost less per high school graduate. So think about that. If you're going to make an investment, wouldn't you want to make an investment that really boosted the odds that many more kids would be graduating, going on to post-secondary education, becoming productive earners, and returning that little bit of an investment you made? I think it was about $500 a student more. That money would be flowing back into the tax coffers in future years, and expenditures wouldn't be needed to rescue kids who had really gotten in trouble in their 20s because they dropped out or they didn't have anywhere to go after high school. New York City has a lot of programs to encourage kids to go on to post-secondary education. And so these schools were very good at selecting community partners to work with kids and encourage them to go and get them internships and summer jobs and that kind of thing. And also to just that extra mentoring support. And so when you think about this, then the extra academic supports the schools offered, like Saturday academies, lunch and learn sessions, special clubs to focus in on students' different interests. That was all aligned with the idea of helping kids figure out what they want to do with their future and how they can get there. So for the family, the school is a place of economic opportunity for their kids and for them too, because a lot of these resources that the schools were offering their children were also available to families, and families began to take advantage of those. So that strengthened the family. So let's look at the next slide, which is what they were doing on career awareness, because most of these kids do not go off to four-year liberal arts schools, although some of them do. And so the school did a lot to sort of advance the expectations families could have for their kids and talk to people from colleges and different careers. And these were open to students and families from all grades, not just upperclassmen. And then the college office did a lot of offering of connections for families and students with people in careers, and then that message back, well, if you want this career, you need to go to college. This program is a good one, or this one. So they were getting a lot of messages from a lot of different sources. Then in the 9th and 10th grade, that's when they start bringing people in to talk to the students and help them with their career awareness early in high school. And then also just getting them those coveted internships and things that are pre-college requirements for technical colleges. So a lot of schools like to see community service and so on. Do we have any questions at this point? Anything coming up in the chat room, Judy? I see there's been quite a lot of entries.
We're seeing some great examples of people who have had a good experience and some bright spots, and some school counselors who have done a nice job of including families as they're discussing the students' success plan and discussing their next steps, and including families in those conversations. We were also talking about how it is a part-time job and what you need to know in order to navigate the high school to college path. And some of that starts as early as 8th and 9th grade. And how do parents know this if they don't have someone like a school counselor who's really reaching out and including them?
Right. It can't just be whatever parents happen to show up to a college fair or a career day. It has to be systematic outreach to get to every parent, every family. Because many families, if no one in their family had ever gone on beyond high school, maybe their goal, they think that if their kids just graduate from high school, that's what they need. And that's not enough in our modern world and our global economy. Kids need to have a lot more than that. And then parents often feel, but we hear that, it costs $100,000 to go to college. We don't have that. There's no way our kid is going to be able to do that, because they don't know about financial aid and the availability of scholarships rather than just high-priced student loans that kids will be paying off for the rest of their lives.
And I saw one earlier that you might answer. I'm just going to pop in here. It was from Donna Marino. I don't know if she wants to raise her hand, but her question was about ratio between students and advisors in high school. Is there a ratio, an average number?
I don't know that there's a magic number, but I think it's usually 10 or 12 students. So and that means that more than just classroom teachers are advisors, but the idea is that all staff members advise students in some way. And a student may have more than one confidant on the school staff, but there is one person, and generally that person sticks with them for the whole 4 years. So it's the same advisor. And as parents said in this study and in other conversations I've had with parents, they'll say, this advisor has become like a member of our family. They know everything that's going on with us. She's like my sister. I can call her and tell her what's happening or tell her some worry that I have. And it's a very rewarding relationship all the way around. However, as I was saying earlier, training is really important. And how to do that. How do you build a relationship with a kind of sullen high school kid who's withdrawn and depressed? And so the school social workers, school psychologists, others can be very helpful in that training and in guiding advisors and how to reach their students and connect to them. But just think about how many, remember that movie Blackboard Jungle came out in the 50s? These giant high schools where, you know, danger lurked everywhere in the stairwell and the hallways and going into the cafeteria. And, you know, there were gangs and all of that. Breaking up, New York City has done a lot to break up those high schools and create smaller schools, with maybe even within large buildings. So there'll be a different school on each floor or each wing. And then that makes it much more personal. And kids who go to the smaller schools definitely fare better. They just feel more like a family. They feel they can connect there. That's a place they can belong. And that school culture is all important. But again, it all starts with the trust. It all starts with the relationships that you have with your students and families. So these were 5 key practices that the schools were using to reach students and families and hear their voice. And first was a very strong transition program. They sent people from their school out to likely feeder schools. Most of these were schools of choice. New York City has this very complicated choice system for high school, and now is implementing it for middle schools as well. Makes your head spin thinking about it, but they send people out to recruit parents and, you know, why should you come to our school? We're gonna put your kid on a pathway to college if you pick our school. And so they have a summer bridge program, almost all of them, that welcomes the whole family. So in other words, the school sees it's not just the students who come to the school, but it's their family that comes. They're enrolling the whole family. And so that's where those messages, those pledges we were talking about earlier are made in this summer bridge program. We're going to work with you. We're going to keep in touch with you. We're going to monitor progress. We want your experts on your kids. You're going to tell us what we need to know about them, and basically setting that goal. But also the program is several weeks, and it catches kids who are behind in one area or another, really tries to catch them up and help them be ready for 9th grade work when they walk through the school door, which we hope will happen for all high school students this fall, back to school in person. And then there's the advisory system, and parents and students come to understand what that is and who their advisor will be, and they meet them and make that connection before school even starts. And then they monitor their progress. Not just are they handing in their homework and keeping their grades up, or do they need extra support, and really trying to, those supports are timely. So as soon as a kid starts struggling, say in algebra, they're pulled out and, you know, caught up. And also for more difficult classes like algebra, students can take them for 2 years rather than, in other words, they take algebra 1 for 2 years, and then they might take algebra 2 for 2 years, or whatever they need. And they're sort of in constant, is this the right program for my kid? And there can be adjustments made as the child goes through the school. And then they're getting, of course, all this information on post-secondary options and taking the fares and the trips. So probably by 11th grade, most kids have an idea where they're going to be headed after high school. And they're, you know, so they're focusing in on what do I need to get into that school? And that school is a place where other kids like them from this school have gone and thrived.
And you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. And then there's close collaboration with families. And the school grooms parents to become leaders. And then those parent leaders really assist. They get the word out. They say, have you been to the college office yet? And, you know, they're sort of community creators. And so they're working on all of these strategies. And now I want to bring Cynthia to join me, Cynthia Ziegler from, we can keep this slide up for now. So Cynthia, introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Cynthia Zingler. I work for Vernon Public Schools, and I am the Director of Family, School, and Community Partnerships here.
And you've been there 4 years, right?
Correct.
Cynthia was telling me this morning that however hard she works and whatever she does, she always feels like they could be doing more. And I thought, well, that's a wonderful sign of somebody who is really determined to do what's needed. And what's your reaction to the study on the beating the odds, Cynthia? Did anything surprise you?
You know, it's interesting. When I look at this, I mean, these are all as a parent of 2 high school kids, I look at this list and say, these are the things that we need to be doing, right? But I think that we have to take a step back and say, if we're, where do we start, right? So I think for me, when I looked at this list, I say, we have to have the relationships with the families, right? To the first step, we have to engage families and build those relationships so that we can have all of these conversations. So I look at the transition one. So when we're getting new families in, how are we building those relationships? And then I also look at the advisory system piece. To me, those 2 pieces are essential, because if we don't have those, we're not going to be able to talk about the monitoring or post-second, we can't get there, right? So I think, and it's interesting when I looked at this, and I have to be honest, when Ann said, do you want to come in and talk about this? I'm like, oh gosh, high school, it's that area. We know that high school family engagement does not look the same as elementary family engagement. My colleague, my team member Kimberly, is on this call, and we've been having this conversation. So what do we want it to look like? What do we need to be doing? And actually, for transition, Kimberly worked with our one of our assistant principals to come up with a survey of our 8th grade parents going into 9th grade to get their voice, right? What do you need in this transition? What information do you as a parent need? What do you think your child needs? Because we know right now, everything looks different, right? We can't do the normal, whatever we do, to welcome families, and that's okay. It's kind of now the time to mix it up, throw it, and say, what do we want it to be? What do parents actually need? What do families actually need? What do our kids need to be successful, to build those relationships? So to me, that was, the piece that really, really stands out, quite honestly.
Yeah. That if you don't do that, then where do you go? What do you do? Where do you start? And I think for a lot of people in high school, it's such a big, complicated place. You just think, well, how do we connect to families at this stage? Because your families are going to be living further away. They're not neighborhood schools the way many elementary schools are.
I think that, it is those things of just, looking at what are the kinds of things we can do to build those relationships with families. Are we offering opportunities, at my own children's high school, you can sign up for, these quick 10-minute conversations, conferences about your kid. But for me, I'm not going, I can look to see what their grades are, but it's about me meeting the teachers so that when I, need to send an email or I get an email, I know who that person is and they know who I am.
Right.
I'm not like when they were in elementary school, I'm not going in to do a craft with the class. If I showed up in the building, I think my kids would have a heart attack, quite honestly, at this point. So, it's looking at, and I do think that now that people are more comfortable with virtual kinds of conferences and meetings, I think it actually reduces one of the barriers, right, for our families. So I think that, the fact that you can hop on a phone and have that conversation, even see the person, not just a phone conversation, but actually see the reactions and put a face with the name. I think that's something that, we continue to offer in person, but for those that choose that virtual, I think it can help us reduce some of those barriers too, quite honestly. So I think we have to look at multi ways of offering information and ways to connect with families.
Yeah, I've been talking, a lot with parents in Connecticut. Of course, all of this is on Zoom, but other states as well, Kentucky and Florida, California. And what I'm hearing is that parents and teachers really like the Zoom home kind of parent-teacher conference home visit, where the parents say, I don't have to try to get there in the middle of the day or whenever it is and drive across town or take 3 buses or whatever I have to do. And, both parents, it's easier for both parents to be there. And then the kids are there and they're kind of, bopping in and out and poking their head in. And the teachers say, well, I sort of get to see the whole family and their setting. I can see the pictures of the kids and, things that make that where they live their home. And nobody's worried about the line that's forming outside the door for the next person to come in and the timer to go off after 15 minutes and all of that. So that might be a practice that we keep, is virtual home visits and, sort of family check-ins like that.
I totally agree that we need to adapt and look at what are the lessons learned, right, from this. There are good things that we can learn from what's happened, and we can take those and apply those. I think that once we start that relationship, especially in 9th grade, then we need to be having the conversations about what classes do you need to reach your goals, right? And what are your goals? So I think it's really important that we have those conversations early on, so we don't have someone in 11th, 12th grade and says, oh my gosh, I was supposed to do this if I want to be X, Y, and Z or get here. So I think that, building those relationships early on and then having those conversations are really important. And I think, doing things like, the opportunities to have someone sit one-on-one or do little video tutorials on how to use your systems to look at grades and, monitor progress and all those kinds of things are really important because the systems can be overwhelming. So I think we have to look at how are we supporting families and understanding, the systems that we have, and, does it have a way to alert you if there's a lower grade, or, what are the features, so that parents know you don't know what you don't know, and what are we doing, because it's on us to help them understand that information.
Good point. I saw that Donna Marino put something up. And Donna, would you like to join us for a minute and tell us, you're doing home visits in Middletown, right?
Yes, we have either family liaisons or home visiting in almost every one of our schools, which has been great. And, one of the things during COVID that they did a lot of is just holding hands with technology. So many families, the parents had a hard time with technology. And if their child was having a hard time, they really needed that support, especially if they spoke another language. And so they really sometimes did these Zoom meetings together and kind of walk through applications, walk through things like Power School, and walk through surveys that they were being asked to do online. And it was very important. And then the other thing is during the beginning of COVID is that we had Sunday night Facebook Live events to help parents with technology. We still have a direct email, and they responded. Any kind of technology needs are responded to within 24 hours. So it's out there. It's still, technology based, but I think it's a tool that we have to support our families to use.
A lot of teachers were in that same boat too, because many of them weren't all that familiar with these like Zoom and these other platforms. So that kind of leveled the playing field for parents and teachers. They were figuring this out together. And I think that one thing, and I'd be interested in both your reaction and Cynthia's to this, is that it seems that the schools that did the best with this remote learning era we were in while the plague was raging, it was the schools that had the best relationships and outreach already with families that fared the best, because you had those connections already formed. So doing things like home visits, and it's interesting because that's a marvelous practice, but that was not one of the beating the odds schools that came up, at least in the study that we found that they were doing. And I thought, well, if they'd added home visits, they might have done even better.
I also know that like our high school staff last summer really we collected what students weren't engaged, and the teachers and staff actually went out and did porch visits over the summer and into the fall, and really tried to understand, why a student wasn't engaging, and help them through whatever it was that they needed to get them re-engaged.
Anne, I'm just going to kind of chime in a little bit. We did a survey in March of spring of this past year to find out what teachers and parents thought. And there were two really compelling things that I thought in Connecticut. And it wasn't large. People were very busy, but it still gave us some really good information. And one was that school staff wanted more preparation, professional development around family engagement. They thought it was a top priority for them in Connecticut. And the other one was because of the outreach that teachers and schools were doing, just because of the need at that point, just to set things up, right? That parents really, really felt, they felt honored, they felt really connected to the teachers that did that outreach. And they valued that. And it actually changed, it changed their mindset about how to do that work. So I thought that was important in Connecticut anyway.
Definitely. I've just been reading some studies on home visiting, and one of the most striking results to me was the major change in teacher mindsets as a result of visiting families and getting to know them personally in their home. And teachers said things like, I thought I had it all figured out, and I knew what I was going to see in these houses. I was going to see neglected kids and miserable conditions and, all this stuff. And I was so wrong. And, 95% of the homes I visited, parents were, just so attentive about their kids and really wanting them to succeed and wanting to be a partner, but just not necessarily knowing what to do. And now I have a completely different relationship with the families, and I'll never see them the same way again. And so I think that it takes an experience like that to have a transformational impact. And I think the things that you're doing, Donna and Cynthia. So let me throw a last question at you both, which is, what can you do at the district level to move your high schools more in this direction? What's the role of the district in doing this? Cynthia, you were smiling.
And what we're working on right now actually is our action plan with the high school, quite honestly, is developing, what those kinds of things. So I think for us, the first step was getting that parent voice, and then so we did that survey, and then looking at, the next step of, okay, this is what they're telling us we need. What are we going to do about it? Right. So I think that it's working with my team member, Kimberly, who I mentioned before, who's our secondary coordinator of family engagement, who works in the buildings at the middle and high school. So working with her to really help guide what this looks like at the high school. And I think part of it is when you get into that post-secondary piece, the monitoring of classes, it is going to be working closely with our counseling department, right? We're working with our school counselors, because that's where a lot of that is. So you have to be careful, because what's your role? So it's not our role and responsibility necessarily to be facilitating, but helping to guide the conversation and looking at what are the parents telling us they need and helping guide some of those conversations. So I think that it's really helping support the school and looking at these pieces and how are they going to implement them. And then looking at what do we need to do. We always look at, our community partners, and, there's all sorts of pieces that go into making all these things happen.
And I'm going to turn this over to Kim, who graciously volunteered and kind of maybe was voluntold that she had to be a reporter.
So our group was super cool because we had people from Connecticut, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. We picked transition to 9th grade, but then also added in new families. So new kids moving into town, new residents. 2 ideas that were super cool. One was a new family club. So not just welcoming the new students, but welcoming new parents, which I thought was fantastic. Someone added to that the foreign language component. So could you group families by language and have new families by language meet together? And also, Keenan, if you could just quickly tell us, what is OVR?
So OVR in Pennsylvania is the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. And it's essentially a service that is funded by the Department, I believe it's Department of Labor in Pennsylvania, and links families or students rather with the opportunity to receive like a coach that will help with transition services, such as getting a ID or a driver's license, but it also will help students look at post-secondary transition goals, whether that's to go on to post-secondary education or to gain employment. And they work with this case manager through OVR, who will meet with the students throughout the year if the family is interested in those services, but will help the family fill out the FAFSA form, do tours of schools, as well as set up job opportunities that the student is during high school that will help the students transitioning or gain willful employment and transition into adulthood. So that's like everything in a snapshot. There's a lot more layers to that, but members of my team asked for, in the breakout room, asked for some information that I'm going to forward over to them.
Oh, that would be great. If you would send it to Betsy or Judy also, then we can share it with the whole group. It sounds like a very interesting program. And it sounds like you kind of talked about both transition and advisory, in the sense that there's a case manager there, and you have somebody that people can connect to. What about group 4? Does anybody remember that they were in, what number group they were in?
That's me, Rachel Allison. Hi, everyone. Repping group 4. Want to give a shout out to Francisco, who led our discussion. He was awesome, funny, and nice, but very efficient. We found just a kind of a note maybe to you all. 15 minutes was not enough.
No, no, we know.
We would have loved a little more time. So we only got to transition to 9th grade. That's what we focused on. Representative from Lyman Hall described their program. Their whole population is vulnerable students, and for their orientation to 9th grade, they ask school counselors and social workers from 8th grade schools, feeding 8th grade schools, to refer kids to a special academy they have every summer, which sounds amazing. They have field trips, they get academic support, they have guest speakers, they bring parents in. So shout out to Lyman Hall for that work. It gave me some ideas for my program. One of our group members mentioned just her own memories of high school, and that they had a day devoted to freshman orientation, and they were, took a tour of the building and learned about what they were going to learn. And she personally felt that was very helpful for her, so recommended it for other high schools. A big challenge that came up was just getting every parent involved. Sometimes no matter what you try, what you offer, at time of day, it just seems that there are some parents who aren't accessible to actually come into the building or even meet virtually. And we talked about partly forgiving ourselves and the parents if that's happening. Obviously, we keep trying every way we can, but ultimately, not every parent has the time or inclination to be involved like that. And sometimes we just have to accept that. So yeah, that was our group discussion in a nutshell.
Interesting. So yes, another shout out for transition programs, because there certainly is research that shows students make a much better adjustment to school and are more likely to stay in school when they've had an orientation. And group 3.
Hi, I'm for group 3. I'm Alicia Thompson. We're another transition group. We focus more on the transition to 9th grade. We did talk a little bit advisory and new families, but it just kind of landed more on the 9th grade. We actually agree we probably needed more than 15 minutes to probably hit all the other 3 that we needed.
That's right.
But just a couple more ideas. One of our members talked about swag bags when they entered into 9th grade, just to get them excited to come to the high school. To piggyback off some of your other ideas was to have the guidance counselors reach out. And if any of my members want to jump in, because there are so many other ones that.
Sounds like you had a really productive and
we did have a
discussion.
productive meeting.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi everyone, my camera is totally not working today. It's a little temperamental. So our group, to all the lovely ladies that were on there, we talked a little bit about transition and advisories. We also talked about how high school families or high school parents aren't as involved in high school transitions. And that most of those conversations, if you see parent representation, it's posters or PTO. What we also talked a little bit about was that our high school students don't really want parents involved. And then I made a notation that maybe that's a good thing, because in college we can't be involved. So, not sure how to attack that or approach it. But in advisories, we talked about how maybe once or twice a week advisories would be performed or implemented 45 minutes per block. And in a high school advisory, they would focus on either capstone projects or any major projects that they needed to complete. In a middle school, my daughter attended, she also had an advisory, and they would do this twice a week. They would have on a Monday for 45 minutes, drop everything and read. And then Fridays, they would have something around their service learning projects, because they had to conduct 10 hours of service projects quarterly. And so, we talked about how the transition is very, it's a struggle for families, and we're not really sure how to navigate it. And then one of our colleagues in the group talked a little bit about how in 8th grade, before they go to 9th grade, that they do a transition presentation for families.
Yeah. Oh, that was a very good roundup, Christina. Thank you.
I'm Rosemary Agati, a program coordinator from Gear Up in Waterbury, Connecticut. I have worked in the past grant with Gear Up for the past 7 years, following students from 6th through 12th grade. And I had, as far as advising, I would say that we were fortunate enough to actually progress monitor and meet with students regularly with a certain caseload, and following through with those students from year to year helped us gain a great connection and a sense where they could rely on us to provide any academic support or social and emotional support as well. We did establish many family engagement activities. I don't want to talk too long, but there are so many different components of it, and getting students connected and their parents and families. One of the things that we regularly did was we scheduled meals for our parents and their families actually to come as a whole, in order for us to educate them and help them with financial aid information, and all the way to preparing for college, and doing all the different preparations for college. And we would, feel welcome.
That's
just a brief overview. Thank you.
And we had someone from Pittsburgh and someone from Arlington, Virginia in our group as well. So we were spanning several states.
And can I add in just a little bit from
Sure,
our
Bonita,
group?
please.
I'm Bonita Allen in Pennsylvania. And we also talked about how one school had an advisory system, then it fell apart. And so then we talked about what kinds of things do you need to make sure that you have in order to make it work, including how do you get it going? How do we sustain it? How do we get our teachers to buy in and all staff to understand the importance of it? And what can families and students do to help to maybe implement something like this in their school or district? And we also talked briefly about transition and also the importance of transition from the 6th grade, starting at the 6th grade, and how important that is.
Yes, we did. Thank you, Bonita.
So our group talked about transitions, more specifically about post-secondary opportunities, and that identified it's a challenge to explain to students what careers are out there. And that's compounded by students not seeing teachers that look like them and having a hard time imagining what's possible. And so some of the strategies we talked about, bringing in speakers of color in fields to show the students what is possible, really talk up HBCUs. And there was a lot of discussion about beginning in earlier grades, particularly the middle school. The credit system is a rude awakening to a lot of students. And so how can we better prepare them? There's power in students talking to students. So discuss sort of an ambassador type of program where high school kids are educating middle school kids, and then really being very loud with families about the supports that are in place, particularly the PACT program, which provides community college for our residents. And that was sort of it. I'm not sure if I forgot anything.
Thank you. And thanks, Cynthia. All the great thinking that's gone on today. So there's an additional resource for everyone to really look at. And this is from the National Network of Partnership Schools. It's a video. I think there's great ideas that have come out of this. Please know that if you go to fridaycafe.com, the video will be on, and we will be sending out an evaluation poll. So we thank you so much. And I don't know if you have any other, thank you, Cynthia, for presenting. Of course, our mentor and our coach, Ann Henderson, who gives us such great information. And guess what? She talks about us all over the nation when she goes as far as our opportunities to connect. We thank you, Ohio. We thank you, Pennsylvania, for being here. And be safe and have a wonderful weekend.
And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Donna and Cynthia, for jumping in and being discussants with me.